This week's show brought to you by the San Antonio Spurs, who said small market teams can't make big free agent splashes. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, and we finally have back our regular co-host, Patrick Minton, aka NBA Geek. Welcome back, Patrick.
Why, thank you. I'm sorry I'm here only in my discorporeal form.
I'm the same way for a variety of reasons. And I'm going to say, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but one of the reasons you were out last week is you were at the World Series of Poker. I assume the fact that you're back and not laughing at me because you made a bunch of money means you probably busted, but how'd you end up doing?
Well, I busted out of the $1,000 no limit home loop tournament within about an hour and a half, then proceeded to drop another $1,000 at the cash tables. Then I went, had some steak, and then the next day went a little bit better. But that first day was kind of brutal.
Well, sorry to hear that, but it's good news for us because I know if you strike it rich in Vegas, you'll probably just leave us behind. All right. So as always, we have our producer, Brian Foster, aka Boxscore Brian. I was going to say, Brian, you got anything to jump in or chime in with?
No, I'm the only one on camera this week, actually. So, yeah, it's all about me this week, guys.
And just for those of you who are watching us live on Twitch TV, you might be included, Patrick. I think you said you heard an echo. It might be Twitch being a few seconds behind us. But, yeah, we go live. I'm proud of us. This is like 3-4 weeks in a row of going live at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv/nerd numbers. All right, tonight's show, pretty common. We're just going to be talking NBA free agency, which I think was kind of cruel to me. I don't know how you feel, Patrick, but it's a holiday weekend. You can probably tell by the sites because I haven't even been moderating the comments. So I took the weekend off, hung out with the wife, went to the beach, came back, and apparently the entire NBA had been traded or signed or whatever, and nothing's the same anymore. So that's what we're going to talk. Patrick, I'm going to let you pick the first team you'd like to discuss because there are quite a few.
Well, let's talk about Dallas.
Oh, Dallas. I actually tweeted at Mark Cuban that I thought they won free agency. And what I will say is that was even before they picked up Jeremy Evans. So the big splash for us, which is just ludicrous, is that Dallas picked up DeAndre Jordan, who, as I've written many, many times, I thought was an MVP candidate last season. My dog apparently agrees. Sorry about that. And then, I can't believe that basically to a conference rival, the Clippers let DeAndre Jordan go for nothing. And on the flip side, I can't believe that the Mavericks basically got him for less than a max contract.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the major thing that Dallas did right here is to replace the pieces that left them with pieces that are similarly effective, but younger and on better contracts. So it seems like a huge win for me that they let Amino go, but Jeremy Evans replaces his production pretty well. They let Chandler go, but DeAndre Jordan is a very, very similar talent and 5 years younger or something like that. Seems like Dallas is...
I was going to say the Jeremy Evans was just such an interesting one from Utah. Just such, Utah's MO has been get good players and then just underplay them. I mean, even who was the Giant who's amazing at defense last year? I can't believe I'm dropping his name.
Rudy Gobert?
Oh, yeah, Gobert. Even Gobert was getting underplayed despite playing well. So it seems like Utah is just the team of pick up fantastic draft picks and just sit them on the bench until other teams sign them away.
Yeah, so hang on a second. This is getting really hard to think. Brian, is there a possibility that the echo is coming from you and you could mute your microphone?
Maybe. It sounds good on our side, though, Patrick, so I'll look into it. And
yeah, but I'm hearing the Twitch stream from somebody, and I don't have Twitch running. So...
we'll look into it, Patrick.
Okay. Sorry, what was the question here?
Sorry about that, everybody. Just basically that Utah has really been silly about, the number of players that are good that they pick up basically as rookie picks and then just kind of bench them and then let other people cannibalize them. I assume the same is going to happen with Gobert.
Sorry, I'm really having incredible trouble, understanding anything anyone's saying. So I'm going to drop from the call and get back in, and maybe that might fix the problem.
All right, we'll keep the show going. I'll make lots of outrageous claims while you're gone, and then force you to agree to them when you get back.
Sure.
All right, so basic to Patrick's point, yeah, the Mavericks lost a few key players, Chandler and Amanu. I am a little curious about Amanu basically because the deal he signed, I think, was for a 4-year deal with the Blazers for only 30 million, which is not that much, but I'm curious what Dallas thought about him. However, that said, Jeremy Evans, I don't know the deal he signed for, but Jeremy Evans and DeAndre Jordan are fantastic trades. And I hear another player they're looking at, and this isn't a fantastic player, but he's a decent player, is Jeremy Lin. So if they just shore up their bench in terms of point guards, it's really a shame Rondo didn't work out. But it is worth saying the last time the Mavericks made it to the finals was when they picked up a center from a Los Angeles, or not, they picked up a center from a former conference champion or team that made it to the conference finals that underappreciated him. So they picked up Tyson Chandler. This time they picked up DeAndre Jordan. It's worked for them in the past.
Sorry, I just joined back in. I'm a little lost in the conversation.
Basically, last time Dallas made some good finals runs was when they did their MO here, which was to pick up a talented big from a team that was a few years removed from the conference finals.
Yeah, I mean, last time they kind of got the difference being that back then nobody wanted Chandler. Dallas seemed to be the only team that was confident Chandler was over his, I think it was he broke a toe or he did something pretty devastating that had him kind of sidelined for a year and a half, 2 years, and a little bit less effective. And Dallas seemed to be the only team willing to shell out the money for him because they were pretty sure he was going to get back to being the old Tyson Chandler. And this time, I think this time it was a case of that there were lots of teams interested in DeAndre Jordan, but I think it was just a case of Dallas presenting probably the most appealing scenario to players. I mean, we talk about this in an environment where max contracts are a thing. You can't just get people with money only. You also have to present, your plan for how you're going to win and how you're going to support that player both on the court and off the court. And I think DeAndre Jordan just kind of looked at Chris Paul and said, well, I'm kind of sick of Chris Paul yelling at my ass, so I think I'll go play for some people that are going to be nicer to me and want me to play. And, I think that I don't really expect Dallas to make a huge leap in terms of wins, maybe a small one, but it's really important to note that, should they have the same record that they have last year, they've managed to, increase their cap flexibility while also getting a little bit younger. And I think that's a big win.
Yeah, and I want to jump around a lot here. Apologies for this, but one interesting thing you mentioned there, Patrick, was the max contract. A friend of mine brought up a fantastic point when it comes to California. So you and I are in the tech space. We always bring this up, all of us on this show in the tech space. And one thing that we always bring up is the differences between what we'd consider the real world and sports. Well, in the real world, I worked at Google at one point in the Boulder office, and it was explained to me basically they had different tiers of pay based on where you worked in the United States because they did cost of living adjustments. Well, in the NBA, they don't really do that. And something worth considering is that California is way more expensive to live in, and its taxes are way worse than Texas. So the ironic part there is just out of the gate, signing even the NBA has some rules with bird rights that give an advantage to the home team to resign, which we'll get to because I don't think the Clippers gave the full effort there. But the problem being it's marginal, right? It's like 3.5%. Well, when you compare that to state taxes, property taxes, one other funny thing that I've thought of before is the marital laws in California are way harsher than other parts of the world, basically in terms of if you get divorced, what's just automatically entitled to your spouse. So California is actually one of the worst places to play professional basketball as a professional athlete just because of all those rules. So other places look more appealing. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, and you already started bringing this up, is I just can't believe how much the Clippers dropped the ball here. I mean, it really should be a no-brainer to be able to get DeAndre Jordan back. Just offer him the max contract immediately. And it's one of those where this is another Dwight Howard situation where it's very apparent that he felt slighted by the team, and kind of for the same reason, which is ironic, which is Chris Paul. I've been mocking Kobe a lot, and thank you those on Twitter that have let me know how wrong I am. It's awesome, Kobe fans. I love you. Thank you for the death threats because I don't think Kobe's a good player. Those have been good. Hopefully, the sarcasm is apparent. But Chris Paul now has something in common with Kobe Bryant in that he scared away a top big in the middle of a team that arguably had another championship run or two in them. I've read some articles that said Chris Paul didn't show up to the pitch meetings, was always ragging on DeAndre. DeAndre kind of became a good scapegoat for the team. I'm trying to think, can you think of a team that's been this close to a title that has legitimately dropped the ball on a star player? I mean, obviously, I think Kobe and Shaq count. Can you think of other examples? Because this seems ludicrous to me.
Yeah, Kobe and Shaq is definitely the one that comes to mind when Kobe got him traded away, and you can't really put it any other way. Like that happened because Kobe wanted it to happen back then. Um, I mean, I could think of other teams that gave away an amazing player that didn't have to give that player away, but not teams that were like, literally on the cusp of winning a title if they just stayed together.
Well, actually, the
Um,
one other, I can't believe I've already forgotten this when I asked you that. It was such a softball. Is obviously James Harden is similar, but the difference, I mean,
yeah,
someone
but
mentioned this to me on Twitter. The James Harden scenario is more egregious because they could have just kept James Harden. Like they had all of his
yeah,
rights.
there was absolutely no reason that they ever needed to part ways with James Harden except for I think when you do the math, they it was about a $1 million difference between the two of them. With even if you assume a 150% salary tax, luxury tax. That means that they decided 3 million a year was not enough to keep James Harden, which is absurd. And as you have also pointed out many times, then given the money that they had already committed to Kendrick Perkins, that's doubly absurd. So, and I think, the league has shown that if you need to dump salary, there's always somebody that is willing to let you dump salary as long as the bribe makes it worth it. So they could have sent a first round pick and Kendrick Perkins somewhere to some team that was willing to take his salary, and boom, no more luxury tax. And the thing that I keep pointing out, when teams give away picks to other teams in order to dump salary, there's always the possibility of buying those or some other picks back later through the same mechanism, right? So, for instance, you trade away Kendrick Perkins and a first round draft pick for like a second round pick and a pure salary dump, but then maybe 2 years later your cap situation is different, and you can do the opposite trade where take a player and a pick from some other team in exchange for them dumping salary. So there's always ways to sort of get around this, and that's why cap flexibility is always more important than cap space, I think. And and it doesn't seem like Oklahoma City plays that game very well. They're just always sort of flirting with the edge of the cap, and it seems like they're always looking to dump one player in exchange for a slightly cheaper player just to stay below the luxury tax threshold. And that's the kind of thing that I'm guessing probably makes Kevin Durant just roll his eyes all the way into the back of his head. But I honestly don't think that the Clippers lost Jordan because of the money. I think they just lost him because he couldn't stand playing for Chris Paul,
Well,
and the money is very
some of the
similar.
stuff I'm read is basically it's not just Chris Paul, but then the other issue is okay if you have if you have two players on your team feuding, and a good example actually was the Bulls. Like Michael Jordan didn't get along with a lot of players on the Bulls. Not a lot of people realize this. He didn't want Scottie Pippen on that team. So, but that if that's the case, if you have players on your team feuding, it is on you as the team to basically convince both players, hey, you both still want to play with us. Now, Chris Paul's on a 5-year max deal. He's not going anywhere. That means it's your responsibility to get DeAndre Jordan on board. And there's a good Arnovitz article that I'll get in the links, but basically he was like, none of the players showed up. DeAndre Jordan wasn't really pitched well. And a funny thing to consider with a lot of these players when we talk about the draft lottery and restricted free agency is most of these players in their career have not had a decision or say in where they're going. And while they've been courted, they never get to do anything with that, right? Like, even if the top team, if the Spurs come up and say, we'd love to have you play with us and give you a lot of money, they don't have any say in that. If on draft day another team decides to pick them first, they go to that other team. So this is one of those first opportunities for these players to actually kind of, flirt with other teams. And that's got to feel appealing. And then I noticed that teams just kind of forget that players are human. And basically, I'm assuming what the Clippers did is said, well, we can offer him more money than anybody else. Why is he even going to look elsewhere? He's on a championship team. We can offer him more money. And it's like, maybe he just actually wants to feel like you want him. It sounds very relationship-y, but it's happened enough times that it seems like something you'd think NBA front offices kind of take into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed out that the money's going to be very similar. I don't think it's so. I remember this came up when Dwight signed with Houston that because NBA players only play like 50 or 41 of their games at home, there's like apparently there's some kind of rule where a certain percentage of your salary is subject to the income taxes in your home state, but that doesn't mean all of it is, because there's all kinds of laws around, well, you live in California 2 months of the year and you play in all these other state X months of the year, etc. So apparently only a certain percentage of his salary is going to be exempt from state income tax. But still,
Well, also
when you factor in that,
something to consider there, Patrick, is the division you're in. So if
yeah.
you're a Rocket or a Spur, well, you're going to be playing in the division that's in Texas. So a lot of your taxed income outside of your home state is still in your home state because you're playing against the Rockets, the Spurs, etc.
Yeah,
If
I'm
you're in
not
a
sure
if you're
if
a
the NBA does that. Like, I'm not sure if they do actual tracking of where you play. I think rather they have some kind of contractual agreements about what percentage of your income you can declare in state uh, versus like, and I think this is basically some kind of reciprocity agreement, but I'm not really certain how it all actually works. But I remember them saying at the time when Dwight signed his contract that only about half of it was going to be exempt from state taxes. The other half was probably going to be taxable in various different states. And it probably has to do with what states the NBA has league offices is or some nonsense like that. I'm not really sure. But the general point is that, for DeAndre Jordan, the difference in absolute dollars is going to be small. Sure, the Clippers could have offered him an extra year, but what it boils down to is at his age, I think what is he, 27? He's probably got one more contract left in him, so I don't think he cares that much about that extra year, especially because the cap will go up before he comes around to signing another contract. So, I mean, I think a lot of people made a lot of noise about these extra years, but if you think about it, the only players that really cared about the extra years were the players who were signing their last big contract, or the players maybe like Kevin Love, who because of his injury history cared more about security than he did about maximizing his market value, or maximizing his future earnings, I should say. So I just don't think that fifth year really played a big role in DeAndre's decision making. And when it comes down to it, it's like, well, it's the same money, except this team looks like it's run by more competent people. It looks like it has players that want me to play with them. It doesn't have a point guard who thinks I'm an asshole and is shouting at me all the time. So there's all kinds of reasons for him to like, just even if we're talking about operating from a purely rationalistic maximizing utility standpoint, there's all kinds of reasons for him to sign in Dallas, and there's very few for him to sign in LA.
I will say, just as like connecting this personally, like when I'm a freelance software developer at this point, I used to work a lot of corporate jobs. There are certain non-monetary benefits that you get, like I hate commuting, that are very hard to put a price on. Where if somebody
Yeah.
everybody, if you say software engineer LinkedIn, you get hit randomly just because when someone's like, do you want to come work in for me Milwaukee, it's like there is you would have to offer me so much money to convince me that I should commute an hour and a half a day to Milwaukee or try and move again. I never
Yeah.
want to move again either. So they're like, all you have to do is relocate or commute. I'm like, heck no. Okay, so I hate to put us on the spot to do this, but I will actually participate, Patrick. So draft grades so far, what do you give Dallas?
I give Dallas draft grades or free
Or,
agency.
or free agency grades. Sorry, I hate draft grades, but
I
free
give
agency
Dallas
grades.
an A minus.
A minus. I'm going to question your minus and see if it's for the same reason as me. The contract that Amanu picked up, I don't think was that bad. I'm curious why they let him walk if that was his asking
That's
price.
my minus. I don't see any reason to let Amino walk. And it just, I mean, maybe it's like the 2 million or whatever it is that makes the difference between offering DeAndre the max and not. I'm not sure, but it doesn't seem like a good decision to let him walk.
Well, I'll make a controversial disagreement with you and say I give him an A just for the reason that whenever you pick up one of the top 5, top 10 players in the NBA in free agency, you've won. And
But
so
they had to let one of the top 5 go too.
well,
So
but let's be the reason I'm okay with this is exactly what we said is basically Tyson Chandler is a player that's had injury history. He is older. This is one of those where like if their options were keep Tyson Chandler keep Tyson Chandler as a risk or lose him for nothing, I'd be against it. But the fact they're able to say, okay, we can pick up DeAndre so we can let Tyson Chandler go, I'm fully fine giving them an A. And in fact, like a same boring thing, we're going to talk the Spurs in a bit. In fact, let's just move on to the Spurs. They're the meat and potatoes. They're
yeah.
the major story here. I mean, when they picked up Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard for basically both of those guys for not outrageous contracts how well both those players play, the contracts they received were good. I
Well,
mean,
Leonard's was the max, was it not?
yeah, but I mean,
I think.
that's the advantage. Like I think
Yeah.
Butler and
Well,
Leonard,
yeah.
it's that you can't just get them back. It's like DeAndre Jordan, right?
Yeah, no,
If you,
it's the Leonard is the same as Butler, right? You just offer the max that you can, and then you can offer, and you praise David Stern for the fact that he's on a cheap contract, because honestly, in a different cap situation, Leonard would be worth much more, right?
and it's
But
also worth stating that Leonard opted out of his thing. It was like I'm going to explore free agency, and the Spurs were like compare them to DeAndre Jordan. Like it didn't happen, right?
well,
Billy.
he didn't opt out of anything. He simply just did not sign an extension in his last year, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think, honestly, I think the Spurs were fine with that because that allowed them to do a lot more sort of cap manipulation because they could wait until, like, they can time it all. They can sign all the other deals before they sign his deal so that there's no cap issues, right?
Yeah, and that was actually you weren't on the show when we talked the draft. You might have been more enthralled because when I was talking the draft, Brian was there. I was very much just like, whatever. I hate the draft. But they got a C grade from somebody, and the guy's comment was, well, all they're doing is picking a stash pick for a 7-footer that's just going to play in Europe. And it was like, well, that should be an A because what they need to do this free agency is be very clever with the cap space, and that's what they did in the NBA draft.
Yeah.
The
Of
players,
course, I mean, let's look at how their previous European prospects have all turned out. That's right.
well, it's kind of a shame because I think they feel bad because Thiago Splitter on a permanent basis was very good, but I don't know if it's just health or whatever. He just never seemed to be able to play a lot of minutes. He always seemed to have something, and I trust them that they got rid of him, but it seems like they were hoping he'd be a full-time player that could kind of ease in out of Tim Duncan, and he never kind of achieved that, but he was still good per minute. So it's like, yeah, they're
Yeah,
always good at fun.
he's a good player. I mean, but this is something interesting. I think Splitter suffers from the same problem that DeAndre Jordan does with the free throws, and it's hard to trust them there, in crunch time. And I really wonder, like, because I hear rumors about this all the time, if they're going to make some changes in the rule book to basically prevent the hacka whoever scenarios, and that really has to make you wonder, like, how much more valuable do players like DeAndre Jordan and Thiago Splitter get if the rule changes work out such that they don't have to shoot 15 free throws a game, because if every time DeAndre Jordan gets fouled you can say I don't want to shoot free throws, I'll just take the ball out of bounds, suddenly DeAndre Jordan becomes a ridiculously supreme awesome force to have in the game in the fourth quarter, right?
And what I'm curious about, well, like that, I could see just simple rule changes being like fourth quarter, kind of same as when you call a timeout, you automatically advance the ball to half court. I could see something saying with 2 minutes left in the game, if you do a foul of this variety,
That's already a rule. But what I think they're thinking about doing is changing it to be the FIFA standard, which is in FIFA ball, if you foul a player off the ball in any sort of intentional manner, it counts as an intentional foul, and you get 2 shots on the ball back, or is it 1 shot in the ball back, or even maybe it's the option to get the ball out of bounds. I'm not even sure, but I mean, there's an actual rule. It's got nothing to do with flagrant fouls. It's about intentional fouls. So where the referee gets to actually clearly judge intent, and the referee gets to make a judgment call and say, was that player trying to make a basketball play, or was that player trying to make an intentional foul? And the rules are pretty clear. If you foul somebody off the ball in that type of manner, it's an intentional foul, and the other team gets the ball back. And if they just adopted that rule, it would be essentially an end to the hack of whomever, because the only time the offense is going to give DeAndre Jordan the ball is if he's in the, if he's in a position to score with it. And if you want to basically say, okay, DeAndre Jordan's going to dunk on you unless you follow him and put on the free throw line, that's perfectly fine, and that's a basketball play. But I don't understand why the rule book is allowing this nonsense where, oh, you're still in your half court and DeAndre Jordan is 300 feet from the ball and I'm just going to go shove him, and that should somehow be free throws. That doesn't make any sense.
I'll agree with that. And I mean, one of the players that would make Andre Drummond amazing. And I don't want to get too much down this rabbit hole. The two other players to discuss, of course. Now, one I think I don't know how I feel about this, but I don't hate it. Is they signed David West to a 1 year, I think $1.4 million deal. And I don't have any complaints with this. He is old, he's 34, but he's played the best ball of his career past age 30, which is a little sketch, but if there's a team that can take advantage of it, it's the Spurs. Yeah. So I like that trade. I mean, this is definitely a Gary Payton to the Lakers and then Gary Payton to the Heat, going for that last ring.
Yeah, and where's the hate for David West, by the way? David West opted out of an $11 million contract to sign for $1.5 million in the Spurs, and I don't hear one person bitching at David West about this. LeBron took like a $4 million pay cut, and people are bitching about it for 2 years, and this guy turned down $10 million to go chase a ring, and nobody seems to care. I'm like, and by the way, I'm not disparaging David West. I don't care. I think that's great. If he values rings and championships, and or if he hates Indiana that much that he wanted to give away $10 million for that, that's perfectly fine. But I'd just like a little fucking consistency from the Twitter world and the internet where, hello, why is it okay that he did it, but it wasn't okay that LeBron did it?
I have no answer on that other than just like big names. I mean, one of the things we've learned, and this just drives me crazy, is the nuance of NBA fans is not that great. I'm debating. I had a bunch of article ideas. It's the off season and lots of stuff going on. But one basic point about Michael Jordan and Kobe is I forget his last name. I think it's Vaccaro, but Sonny Vaccaro, I think that's his last name, who's in the great documentary Soul Man on ESPN 30 for 30. He was the marketing genius behind both Nike and Adidas for Kobe and MJ. And it's worth saying that obviously people bought into the hype, like marketing works on people. So the honest truth is David West is wallowing away in obscurity in Indiana, especially after the team stopped making it to conference finals. And nobody's noticing, whereas LeBron James is on all the shoes, is on all the commercials, so people notice. But okay, sure. But David West, takes a pay cut, and I can't fault the Spurs for that. I think.
I mean, they have for the veterans minimum, he costs less than a draft pick. I mean,
exactly. And the other thing about the Spurs that I think is interesting is going for players that are going to buy into your system. DeMarcus Cousins is a great example, where this player has all the talent, all the skill in the world, obviously, but he's clearly stupid. I mean, I'll say basketball stupid. Maybe he's intelligent. Maybe he is a Rhodes Scholar or something. But he makes tons of stupid basketball decisions, and he's already fighting with one of the best. I thought George Karl with DeMarcus Cousins was a match made in heaven. If there was ever a coach that gave preferential treatment to offensive-minded bigs that was going to let stuff go, I thought they would work together, and they're already feuding. So the Spurs are like, let's get players that are actually going to listen to us. And so this is the question I'm going to ask you, Patrick. And then I want your grade for the Spurs. So clearly re-signing their best young players, they win. A+ for that. And according to my own metric, I already have to give him an A for getting Kawhi back. Getting David West for the league minimum, he still seems productive. It's just like Paul Pierce. David West and Paul Pierce, same thing. They're old. It's a risk, but they're getting him old and cheap. What are your thoughts on Aldridge to the Spurs?
It's kind of so Aldridge is a good player, but he is nowhere near the MVP caliber player that everyone sort of assumes he is. On the other hand, you can't help thinking, well, okay, he gets in San Antonio and he suddenly starts listening to everything that Popovich is saying. And Aldridge has, for many years, Aldridge has said in lots of interviews that he's not going to start shooting threes until he gets older, and he kind of loses a step and he needs to add the three to his repertoire. Well, I'm guessing Pop is probably going to make him shoot threes, and he's got a good shooting stroke. So if he can start hitting threes, at the 35% clip, and maintain his rebounding efficiency and his defense, he could turn into an amazing player. But I don't really know. I mean, I think I'm going to give this one kind of an incomplete because it really depends on how well he really adopts himself to the Spurs system. Um, if Aldridge is anywhere near the league leader in 2-point shots like he was last year, that does not bode well for the Spurs at all. But I somehow don't think that's going to happen because I don't think Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich are going to allow that to happen.
And Patrick, I do have his shooting numbers up on screen right now. He shot only 47.5% from two, as you were saying, not good.
Yeah, no.
However,
but he led the league in those shots, right?
He was actually 35.2%, right on the button almost, last season from 3-point. However, it was only 2 per 48 minutes, but still, maybe you're onto something there.
And that was bad. And if
that
he can
was
up
the
that
most
to 3
he'd
or
taken
4,
of his career.
That's right.
Yeah, if he can up that to like 4 or 5 per 48, and then drop a lot of those terrible 2-point shots that he takes. Yes, he's an amazing mid-range shooter, but that is the most worthless skill in the NBA. So, I mean, again, like he led the league in those mid-range shots, and that's not going to bode well for the Spurs if he does that again next year. But I somehow don't think that Pop is going to allow that to happen. And I mean, we've seen this with many players. Bellinelli was a very sort of average, below average player throughout his career, and all of a sudden he got to San Antonio and he was an amazing player because he fit the system perfectly. But I'm very, very curious to see how Aldridge does in this. And I think, defensively, I think it has a lot of great potential because they're both, they've got a huge front line now, right? Aldridge is, I think, 7'2", and Duncan is 7 feet tall. I mean, it's really a Twin Towers lineup, and I'd kind of love to see a little old school flashback to those big lineups winning titles. But I think it's really going to come down to how they use him offensively.
So I've got
so I give him a B. I give him a B. Because as much as you're right. Just re-signing Green and Leonard was already like great, but let's face it. I mean, re-signing Leonard is not an achievement. That's what anyone would have done in that position. And as for Green, I don't know how they got him.
That's the
well, but Leonard didn't have choices. Like he's a restricted free agent, so it's not like he could go out and sign somewhere else. They had, the only so if Leonard had gone somewhere, the only thing the Spurs did here is they just outright gave him a maximum, rather than saying, okay, go out on, because they could have said, go out on the free agency market, get yourself an offer letter, we'll match it, and then that would have been 1 year less, and it also would have been probably 4.5% per year raises less, meaning Leonard would have gotten a little less money, and thereby the Spurs would have kept a little bit more cap room. But they very wisely said, well, fuck that. We're just going to give you the max. We're not even going to bother with that because they know the cap's going up next year anyway. So basically, starting next year, Leonard is basically you're getting Leonard at a 25% discount because next year the max goes up by about 25%. And since Leonard is worth the max, every year beyond this year that you sign him to is at a huge discount. So they're like, yeah, let's take 5 of those, please.
Well, we'll also see what happens in the new CBA, because one thing that happened, for instance, was with Kevin Durant. If you recall, there was the Derrick Rose rule got implemented in the last new CBA, and Westbrook was applicable for it, and they retroactively gave that to Kevin Durant. So we'll see how savvy the players are when they negotiate a new contract to say, hey, we have all these max players, we deserve these new things we got. We'll see if that comes up.
Yeah, well, the thing about that, though, you got to remember also that the CBA, like the vast majority of the players union are the mid-range players, so they're going to be the ones that are going to really push most of the agenda anytime it comes down to a vote, which means that in all likelihood in the next CBA, rookies will get screwed over more because the rookies are the ones that don't have a vote, right? If you're in a union and you're voting about how employees should be treated, you care a lot more about the people who currently work than the people who will work in the future. So rookies are going to get screwed over, and mid-range. So those mid-range players are going to get probably better deals, and the max players will take care of themselves.
Oh yeah. Okay, and so I have we'll see if these all make it to an article about Aldridge, and I was talking with Devin about this, and he had a few points. One is if you look at if you look at Tim Duncan's mid-range shots through his career, as he got older, he started taking fewer and fewer of them. So that bodes well. It seems like they started realizing, hey, take these out of your repertoire. Obviously, a point you made was Marco Bellinelli, right? This player who had a great 3-point shot, and that was it. And, he went to the Spurs, and I shook my head and said he's never been a good player, and the Spurs got him to play well. What I really love about the Spurs this season is we have two fun case studies. We have Bellinelli going from a very sound, smart, savvy team where he was playing like a star to going back to a horrible team. The Kings are such a mess. Now we have Aldridge, who has been kind of a stupid player his entire career, going to a smart team. This is a common argument we get into, right? Is how coachable players are, how important system is. This is going to be a fun case study to see what happens. One other note on Aldridge, I was looking over his numbers. He is a great rebounder. He's fantastic. And if you look at his offensive rebound numbers.
But what's interesting is that's a new phenomenon, right? He was not early in his career.
Well, what's interesting is he's really good on the defensive end. He used to be a better offensive rebounder, but he started taking shots further from the rim. So I'm wondering if the Spurs can say, look, we'll get you open mid-range shots. We get it. You're great from mid-range. You're fantastic, but you should only be taking those shots if you're open. Hang out closer to the rim. We'll get you good looks. And I'm really wondering what's going to happen. I'm excited because in the NBA, I always kind of root for natural experiments that we can watch, even if it means because, so few teams do stuff, so few teams try stuff. We come on this show and hypothesize all the time. And, we never see a lot of changes. So I'm excited for this for that reason. I think the metaphor I gave someone was, I was like, it's like when your friend buys a really expensive toy. You couldn't justify spending the money on it, but they did, so you kind of get to vicariously enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be a really interesting natural experiment to see. I predict that Bellinelli will be a lot worse in Sacramento, and that Aldridge will be a little better. I don't think Aldridge could be that much better, but I think he's going to be a little better in Portland.
I'm gonna risk it all. I'm gonna hedge it all. I think he's gonna play like a star.
He's not that far from a star right now, right? He's an above average player right now.
Now, one thing to put in here, though, guys, is the definition of being a good coach, the part of it we're talking about now, improving players, isn't it according to wages of wins if a player plays at one level, goes and plays for a coach, is improved by that coach, and then remains improved after they leave the team? Is that the wages of wins definition?
Well, maybe, but I don't agree with that definition because I think it's about a system, right? Like, I think coaches can improve players in a couple of ways. One, they can actually teach the players to be better players. I don't necessarily know that you can do that very well with guys as old as LaMarcus Aldridge. But another way you can make players better is to put them in systems where their skill sets are where they're going to succeed more often, right? You just put them you give them more opportunities to succeed. And I think that's what Pop does really, really, really well is he puts players in positions to succeed.
I don't disagree. So you've given the Spurs a B. I think I'll hold with my A because I think they're kind of playing with house money at this point. And I think we didn't really mention this, but since they haven't done anything, I think the Clippers have to get an F in free agency because I think at this point it is unless they pick up LeBron James, it is at this point physically impossible for them to replace the loss of DeAndre. Right. It is physically impossible for them to replace DeAndre Jordan. If they had picked up, say, Tyson Chandler, right, then you can give him and say, all right, they're giving Chris Paul someone he likes playing with, or if they had maybe gotten even Robin Lopez, but there are no centers left in the NBA. There's no player left that they can pick up outside of LeBron James that can come close to helping that team, and it's a tragedy.
And I have a theory that LeBron James is never ever going to play in the West.
Really?
I mean, aside from the fact that he's probably not ever leaving Cleveland, I don't think he would ever play in the West. Because in the East, he has a pretty clear path to the finals every time. Right? The East is so terrible that he can pretty much every year he can get himself a ticket back to the finals. And even if he's an underdog in the finals, he gets back year after year and he wins a few of them because sometimes the underdog wins, right? If I were him, I would stay in the East. And if I were any big star, I would want to be in the East playing with LeBron James because it's like, okay, here's my ticket to the finals. And then once you get to the finals, who knows what happens? Whereas you're in the West, you could be a fantastic team in the West, and that's no guarantee of even making the conference finals. I mean, ask the Clippers, ask the Rockets. I mean, you could be a great team in the West and still not sniff the finals. But
Yeah,
if you're a
one of
great team in the East, you're pretty much all the way to the finals.
your third best player in the West tweaks their ankle in the second round and you're screwed because you just can't keep up with the team.
Yeah.
You're in the East and you can literally lose a star every round and still have a shot.
It's like literally every round somebody chopped off one of their fingers, and yet they still were able to get to the finals.
And by the way, I forgot to mention this because the screen is a little interesting. The free agent tracker on NBA.com, because these contracts haven't been finalized, a lot of them because they have to wait. The Clippers did pick up Paul Pierce, and they did make the trade for Lance Stevenson, both of which we thought were good moves to accentuate their bench. But as soon as they lost DeAndre, there's nothing they can do this free agency. Let's see.
I'm looking for a Roy Hibbert and Lance Stevenson reunion.
Oh, geez.
Let's make it happen, baby.
Did you hear that basically that was a possibility? And what would have had to have happened is Dallas would have had to have helped out. And what's funny is I think getting Roy Hibbert on that team would have made them worse because he's so...
Actually, I was thinking that if I'm Dallas, I would totally help them because that makes their team worse. I could be like, oh, yeah, let me just help you, quote unquote, help you from the 4th seed to the 9th seed. Go for it. Yeah, I would totally help them out if I was Dallas.
But anyway, yeah. So basically, there's I would have loved to have seen that happen. The Lance Roy Hibbert again, but that's penny wise, pound foolish. There's nothing I can do. Let's talk the Kings a little. You were very excited about this before, and by the way, we're probably not going to get to all the teams.
What? Oh, you mean to talk about it?
Yeah, we're probably not going to get to all the teams in free agency just because there's been so much action. But
we have all summer long because really, what's the hurry? I mean, it's all happening now, but. It's not, the ramifications aren't going to be felt for 3 months.
Yeah, that is true. And I actually have some off-season show. We've already started shooting those back and forth. Like, hey, it's the off-season. Maybe we can do some other stuff. I caught up on a show called Sports Night. And I'm actually debating writing some posts about that in the off-season. But anyway, the Kings, wow. Like, what? Last week, I don't know if you listened to the show, Patrick, but me and Brian were discussing Sam Hinkie and the implications of him as a GM, and would other people do business with him because he's kind of started being viewed as a jerk, and maybe he lied about injuries with Drew Holiday and he keeps screwing people in trades, and we were like, well, is this going to hurt his image around the league? And I think something you said at the top of the show was, having cap flexibility is just such an edge in this league, and no further proof, right? A week after, we're like, will anybody be willing to do a deal with Hinkie? The Kings basically just gave him players and picks for nothing.
Yeah.
Just wow.
And what's ridiculous about this is I can totally see other teams showing interest, because they actually want the players in Jason Thompson or Carl Landry, probably especially Jason Thompson. Jason Thompson looked terrible last year, but that kind of was a really odd reversal of fortune. He looked pretty good the year before that. So I really don't know what happened there. And I would not be surprised at all if teams show interest in him later on, maybe even before the season starts. I'm not sure. And I think what's really interesting here is now Philadelphia has something like 6 serviceable big men, if you count Jahlil Okafor. So they have Okafor, they have Noel, they have Landry, they have Thompson, and they have we don't know if Embiid will play. It's likely he won't play. So I mean, they got a lot of serviceable big men, but they have no, like, their point guard and shooting guard positions would look just completely awful.
And what ended up happening with Brandon Knight? I forget about that.
He has signed a 5-year, $80 million contract, I want to say.
With the Suns, yeah, jeez.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, that's a contract I hate, but we'll get back to that in a second. So, I mean, it's entirely possible somebody calls in a few months and says, we'll give you, a second round or 2 second-round picks for Jason Thompson or something like that. And, that's totally the kind of deal that Hinkie would love, right? And there's no real reason for him to keep Jason Thompson. So he's picked up some draft picks, and he's also picked up a couple of players that he can flip for more draft picks if he so chooses. It just seems like a crazy deal. And I was listening to the Low Post today where they had Tom Ziller on. It was the episode from July 2nd. And they were both speculating because Sacramento has tried really hard to free up cap space, and then, as it turned out, didn't really have anyone to spend the cap space money on. They were speculating whether or not the Kings might try to back out of this deal because obviously nothing can be written and signed off on until July 9th or 10th. So in theory, any team can back out of a deal, even though that's incredibly unlikely because it's essentially like burning all of your bridges if you do that. But
well, I just don't, for the life of me, understand the Kings. It's one of these funny things because, right, Vivek Ranadive, he gets this great story from Malcolm Gladwell about how he coaches his daughter's team to the state championship, and he does it. Yeah. I'll finish the tangent for the listeners, but and it's via looking at metrics and not in going, hey, in basketball, possessions really matter, so steals and rebounds are what's most important. And then apparently he's got this big tech firm that he's willing to have smart people look at the analytics. And then he brings in Dean Oliver and he brings in George Karl. And for, my basic fight with George Karl is you play the wrong players, but you give him the right players, he does fine. So it's so odd to me to see a company that in theory has all of these things going for it and then not even really adhere to its own kind of the story behind this company. If you look at the Kings as a company, it doesn't adhere to any of what we've seen. Because I've met Dean Oliver. I've talked to Dean Oliver. There are players that this team has gone after or traded that I know he doesn't like, at least based on past conversations. Maybe he's changed his philosophy on basketball, but I doubt it. So I just don't understand what the heck is going on with this team. It's quite baffling to watch.
Yeah, it's pretty baffling. I mean, I think the central tenet that we seem to see playing out is that Vivek Ranadive, is that how you pronounce it? Ranadive?
Vivek Ranadive, yeah.
He doesn't really seem to value draft picks at all. He has consistently traded them away, and he's consistently seemed to have the idea, I can just buy good players. I don't really need draft picks. I'll just buy good players. And, given the players that he's going after, that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, players like Rudy Gay and I mean, Rajon Rondo at this point is like, I feel kind of ambivalent about that deal because it's a 1-year deal, but still, it's like, was that worth trading away essentially 3 draft picks for? Because when it comes down to it, like the pick swaps are going to be big deals in that trade. I guarantee you, those pick swaps are going to be big deals.
He was also looking, if I recall, for Rondo and Monte Ellis, and that was something that even the Mavericks had given up on at this point. So I just don't understand what's going on in that team. I've dissed them a few weeks in a row. Do you want to give them an off season? I want to just say F. I'm trying to see if there's anything they've done that's redeemable to get them out of that. Maybe D-.
Well, they've made some redeemable moves, but this trade is so bad, I give them an F.
Let's see. Kufus wasn't half bad. I don't mind the Rondo gambit. But yeah.
The problem with Kufus, though, is that you have DeMarcus Cousins, so he's not going to play. I mean, he's going to play, but he's not going to play enough to make a difference, right?
Kind of the same deal with Memphis, where you've got Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol. So what are you supposed to do with this other guy?
Yeah.
All right.
I would have loved to see some team that had a real need for a center, that had a terrible center, just say, well, what happens if we take Kufus and give him a starting job, right? I would have loved to see a team do that. Like, here's a great example. Could the New Orleans have said, okay, we don't really want to pay Omer Asik that much money, so let's get Kufus and give him a starting job for, like, what is it, $4 million a year or $5 million a year, whatever.
Kufus. Ooh, I would have liked, next to Anthony Davis. That's an intriguing prospect.
Exactly. There's tons of teams that could. I mean, Kufus is a very effective center, and there's tons of teams who could totally use one. Why not spend $4 million a year and give him a starting job? What is it? I think we just scrolled by it. It's like maybe it's like $7 or $8 million a year. Still a significantly better deal than what many centers are demanding nowadays.
It's really odd. I think Ari Caroline wrote the article on this a while back, but I don't think teams understand bigs in the NBA as much as they should, which is so funny because of all the things that have changed in the history of the NBA, being good at rebounding and being really tall or big arms or whatever you want to call it has remained consistently important for the same reasons. And it seems the thing that teams have forgotten more and more. By the way, the Kufas signed a 4-year, $33 million deal. So that's still high. But one of the things to what you're saying, I think at this point too, the Kings have to overpay for any player they pick up
Oh
because
yeah, who would want to go to that mess?
there is no one who wants to go to that team, and I don't understand. Let's see, are there other teams we want to specifically talk about? One I wanted to give a little shout out to, kind of, and I wanted to get you've started talking about this already about the implications of the upcoming CBA, is the New York Knicks, because the two moves they made, and one of them I was kind of laughing at was Aaron Aflalo. I don't hate it, but $8 million a year seems a bit. But you've kind of pointed out that's not going to be as big, and he's not a bad player.
But so $8 million a year is the new mid-level. But so my philosophy, not that anyone's ever going to give me a job and let me test this, but my philosophy on contracts is generally that every team should be trying to get two types of contracts, 2.5, let's say. One is maximum level contracts to superstars, because these are always bargains, right? Doesn't matter how expensive it is, it's always a bargain, right? LeBron James at $25 million is a bargain because he could make $50 million, right? DeAndre Jordan at $20 million is a bargain because he's worth $35 million, right? So the other is rookie contracts, because rookie contracts are super cheap, right? And they, you basically get to exploit them for a few years, and then they become restricted to free agents, and then they're probably gonna fall into either that superstar level where you give them the max and underpay them, but nobody can compete with you for their services, so that's great, or they're not, and you can trade them away or let them go, and no harm, no foul. And then sort of the second and a half or third would be, contracts where you're underpaying for somebody because the league doesn't properly evaluate or properly evaluate their skill set. So the examples here are like Brandon Wright and Alfred Camino and Jeremy Evans and those kind of players that you can get for $2 or $3 million because nobody seems to value what they do, even though what they do is really amazing. And then there are some players, like you can get some players for $7 or $8 million that really, in a truly, if people were evaluating players right, those players would be worth more like 12 or 13 million. So I'm trying to think of good examples here. Kufos might be one, except they're not going to pay him the money he deserves. Or a while back, Ryan Anderson got a deal like that, and even though he later got injured and it didn't seem to work out at the time, I thought it was a really good deal. All of these mid-level contracts for competent players where the contract is essentially a fair deal are, in my opinion, really bad contracts. So giving Aflalo like $8 million a year sounds like a really terrible idea, because $8 million a year is important cap flexibility money that especially a team like the Knicks that is going to be terrible could really use, right? Despite the couple of good signings they made, that's still going to be a terrible team. They could really use the cap flexibility to make a hinky deal or two, right? Instead, they're paying a fair deal for $8 million a year to a fair player who's going to be good, not great. That seems like the worst kind of contracts you can make. In fact, those kind of contracts are so bad that in Minnesota, we had a nickname for them. They were contracts, right? Because David Kahn at the time was throwing $5 million a year to every fucking player in the NBA that he thought he liked. And so the whole roster was so full of these mid-level contracts that he didn't have any room to sign max-level free agents at all. He didn't have any room to make trades for max-level free agents. He just had a bunch of average players signed to like $5 million a year. Well, 8 or 9 million is the new 5 million, and you don't want to have like 6 players on your roster that are worth $7 or $8 million, because you're not going to win any championships with a roster like that. Because you look at what happens in Golden State. Like, you win the title with all these great young players, but then eventually you got to pay for them, or it's happening in Cleveland too. Eventually you have like 4 max level players on your contract. And guess what? If all your non-max level players are making $8 million a year, then you're paying $300 million a year in salary instead of like $150 million a year. And it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah, and what was I trying to think of this? One of the things that's been kind of interesting to me on Twitter, right, is the chart we're seeing is the upcoming CBA is going to really inflate contract values. But I'm actually glad you said all that, because I'm kind of on the same page, which is when people are like, this player is a bargain with the new CBA, my thought is always, well, are they a good player? And I think I've said this to Brian a lot on the show, is getting a veteran without upside that isn't already a very productive player is never appealing to me, even if they're unless they're, maybe 10th through 12th on your bench. You just need someone, and in that case, it damn well better be a short contract, right?
Or
David
at least
West.
not an expensive one. What do you need to pay $8 million a year for number 10 for?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, and I'm saying like David West is an example, right? Like this is a guy.
Yeah, West is
I,
great.
I don't think he's going to be playing a lot of minutes. I hope he's not, but that's fine. But yeah, when teams basically do what you're saying, which is Aaron Aflalo on the Knicks will actually probably be a starter, but that's just because they're that bad. But yeah, I'm just not excited about the signing because I'm like, he's not. We've seen him, right? At his best, he's a good player, and that was years ago on a good team when he was younger, and he's already older. I don't like this trade where people go, "Oh, it's a discount with the new thing." Now, the Robin Lopez trade, or signing, I absolutely love.
Yeah, actually, that would be a good example of what I was previously talking about. That's a guy who, if we were evaluating him properly, he should be making 12 plus, right? And instead, they're paying what is it, 8 for him?
Let me see again. Yeah, there's so many freaking.
I've got it up on screen right now, guys. He is. Oops, I went to the wrong screen. So he's making 12. Almost 13 million in year one, and it's going to be 14.3 in year four.
Oh,
50 million total
for that deal. That's a fair deal. I mean, that's not a great deal, but it's a fair deal, I guess.
This is according to Jared Dubin's Twitter, anyway, at JADubin5.
Okay, I thought he was cheaper than that, but.
Well, I think it's clear too that he would be cheaper than another team. Like there are a few teams that are paying a discount for players, and then there are other, like the Spurs are another example. Well, it seems odd to us because we bash him regularly. Aldridge signed a discount to play with the Spurs, right? Because he could have gotten max deal. I think he only did 4 year, 20 a year, 20 million a year, if I recall.
Isn't that the max?
I think it's close to or something. I'll have to take a look, but I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely.
I assumed it was because it's the same deal that DeAndre got in Dallas.
Okay, so maybe 420 is the max. Maybe I'm just off my numbers, but it seems like Aldridge could have made a little more to play with Portland, right? Because they have his bird rights. David West clearly could have gotten more money. So if you're a really good team, you can get a discount having players that want to play with you. Whereas when you're a bad team, you basically have to open up your wallet a little.
Yeah.
All right. So actually, I can't believe I didn't put this team on the script. I believe when you two met, you actually were talking about his drafting. But the Toronto Raptors, I think they're doing pretty well so far, if I recall all the moves they've been making.
I think they're doing well too. I think the one thing with the Raptors is I've been holding my breath for like 3 years now. I think it's that long since Masai took over. I keep waiting for him to trade DeMar DeRozan because that guy is not a very good basketball player. I mean, he just really I think as long as they have him, and particularly as long as they have him and they treat him as if he was the star of the team, it really limits kind of their ceiling. But I love the Biyombo signing. That's a crazy good signing. People forget, yes, he has terrible hands, but let's talk about what he can do. He can rebound like crazy, and he can block shots. And he's like 23 years old or something like that. This is a crazy, crazy good signing.
And so was he injured last year? I'm not finding him when I'm trying to look him up.
No, I think he was just in the coach's doghouse and didn't play very much.
Fair enough. And yeah, so you like the Biyombo trading. Obviously, they got, or signing, they also obviously got DeMar Carroll and Corey Joseph, both very productive players last year. And then you liked their draft. So, I mean, actually, I forgot to have us give a grade to the Knicks. I don't know. I think C plus.
To the Knicks, yeah, I'm gonna go with C. I think that. I mean, I think the draft choice they made is fine. It's whatever, the. I mean, when you look at Porzingis, it's Porzingis. Is that how you pronounce it? It's hard to not kind of see Andrei Kirilenko, and the hope that he'll become a player that effective. And when you're kind of drafting in that spot, I think it's perfectly fine to draft that kind of future potential. I thought the Theo Quinn signing was good. It's a cheap deal, and he's I think he's only 24 years old or something. So there's some potential there. The Lopez deal is a great deal. Actually, I think fans are going to be really surprised at how at him, and they're going to like him. I think they have the potential to be a playoff team next year, but that doesn't mean very much in the East, obviously. And a lot's going to depend on Melo, because Melo's starting to get to the point where we can officially call him old, and he's also coming off some nasty injuries. So, I mean, if you thought Kobe chucking shots that nobody wanted him to take was bad, Melo has the potential to be much worse. I guess it kind of just depends on the coaching, how they use him. Um, I, it's a mystery to me, but I'll be curious to see how it all plays out.
Oh, I love the Knicks always as kind of the, as long as that team is around, they're entertaining. They're a big market. They have crazy stuff going on in the front office. I
Mm-hmm.
like it. So we both give them. I'll stick with a C. I'm fine with that. Okay, so we were in the middle of the Raptors. I mean, DeMar Carroll is one of the few players off of the Hawks that was both really really good and then also in a reasonable age because Kyle Korver
Yeah,
we've loved for years, but he seemed to be getting older. So the DeMar Carroll pickup was fantastic.
yeah,
So
that's a good
I
pickup.
can't. I don't think I can. I don't. Have they done anything bad in the offseason? Because unless they have, I think they're a pretty easy A.
Yeah, I can't think of anything bad that they've done in this offseason, but um, it's there's so much has happened in so little time that I really have trouble kind of keeping my head straight what all the deals were. But I can't really. I mean, I love the Biombo signing. Um, I love the Carroll signing. I think this is going to be basically a good playoff team in the East again. Again, you're kind of stuck in this spot where I think every team in the East that doesn't have LeBron James has to feel like they need, they're just one superstar away from really being, a contender. I think that's kind of the big problem in the East is that, well, there's that team that has LeBron James, and when it comes time to meet them in the playoffs, my depth isn't going to matter that much because LeBron James is going to play 44 minutes a game. Um, what am I going to do about that? So I kind of feel like the power balance in the East is still kind of like LeBron and then everyone else. But I think, Toronto looks like it very much will be in the like top half of that everyone else conversation. And maybe some of their players will emerge to be, turning into the star players that because we kind of keep expecting JV to break out and become a real star player. They lost Amir Johnson, which kind of sucks, but
I
I
think
think
they've easily made up for it. Then,
yeah, I think so too.
and then the one rough part, right, is Kyle Lowry last year. He looked amazing.
He,
He actually got an All Star berth, and then come playoff time, he was like, never mind.
Well, he actually didn't look good the whole second half of the year. I don't know what
Yeah, I
happened.
agree with that.
I don't know what happened there. If this is a mental thing or what happened, but he kind of just fell off a cliff in the second half of the year. So hopefully he can bounce back too.
All right. Again, we're like you mentioned, we have the whole off season to go. So if we left out your team, well, don't worry, we'll get to it in between talking about sports night. Now, the one last team I want to talk before we I'd say wrap up the show and then go into next week is the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm pleasantly surprised so far. I believe I'm actually just looking up the terms of the Chris Middleton deal. I think they basically probably on the new CBA gave him fair market value, but he's still a good player, young and upside.
Yeah,
He played very well last year. He's
he's
still
young and
young.
on upside, right? So I like that deal.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, he's going to be making 14 million a year, which if you consider
He's a
that's
borderline star already, and he's like what 23, so
exactly.
24. I think that's
So,
fine.
new CBA, that would be what, maybe 9 million a year. And the current CBA, I can't see a problem with that. They
Yeah,
actually got, I wasn't watching close enough, I guess. Greg Monroe, it looks like you get rid of Josh Smith and Greg Monroe regresses to being a good player. So Greg Monroe is kind of hit and miss for me, but he's played very well and he's young. And then it looks like Jared Dudley opted back into his deal. Who knows if they'll trade him or whatever. So thus
but
far, I think
I like Dudley, and he's on a good deal, right?
yeah,
I mean, I don't think they should try to trade Dudley unless they don't want to win. I mean, I think he'll be great. I'm going to assume he's coming off the bench, but I'm not sure.
yeah, I mean they've got good players. They had some upside last year, so comes down to it. I think the Bucks, I'm just throwing. I'm being. Last week we dissed the draft grades because of how many people are just giving out good grades. Now to be fair, I think we've only gone through 7 teams, and we basically hand select these teams. So obviously we're going to look at some of the better ones, but I think the Bucks are an A for me.
I'm going to go with B just because, like you said, you can't give everyone an A.
Okay.
um, I'm not sure I'm that super high on the Monroe signing. We've seen a lot of variance in his game over the years, and he's not as young as the typical guy coming off his rookie deal. So I don't know if I like that one that much. Again, it's only 2 years, but I mean, because it's 2 years with a player option in the third, I think, which he's more than likely to decline, I guess.
Yeah, with the new,
Um,
if he's scoring it all, he'll be worth more in the open market.
yeah, so I don't know if I'm that high on it, but I think, and it also, I mean, is he going to play center or power forward? I think that's a thing that matters too. Um, he's kind of slow defensively, and his game is very much sort of, relegated to under the post in the mid range. It's hard to dislike it because you like his skill set and you like his efficiency. At the same time, I just can't help feeling that they just didn't have to commit to him. Like,
one of the big surprises.
again, everyone in the East is a superstar away from competing with LeBron. Like, sorry, all of the good teams in the East that need to go from good to great, they're like one superstar away from competing with LeBron. And so, is that one superstar spot Greg Monroe? I don't think it is.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I think he's a very good player, but if you want that number one option, it has to be a little better than Monroe. But,
Yeah.
I can't feel bad. I'll give him
I
some
think that
hometown.
the really interesting thing to watch with them is going to be Michael Carter Williams to see if he, you know, like ever comes close to realizing his potential, because he has the potential to be amazing. If he can ever learn to shoot. I mean, people just like, if you think Rubio is a bad shooter, watch Michael Carter Williams for a while.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm not optimistic at all on that, but if he turns it around, he turns it around.
But that's the thing,
Okay.
is like he's so good at the non-shooting stuff, and that's usually for me. That's like the big thing. If you're really good at rebounding and assists and steals, you can learn to shoot or be efficient shooting, or even just learn to be a player who doesn't have to shoot much, like Rubio. It's very, very hard to become good at all those things, though. To become good at rebounding, assists, and steals, that's really, players don't generally change their skill sets in those areas. So I still remain kind of high on Michael Carter Williams, but at some point it's like, well, when's he going to start figuring it out?
I'd agree with. I agree with that 100%. What you're saying completely matches the numbers, right? If you look at year to year stuff, shooting percentages are one that's more, can move around, can change based on system, based on players making smarter decisions. The other ones don't. So the question is, can they actually get Michael Carter Williams to even be slightly better as a shooter? But I'm hopeful on the Bucks, and maybe it's just me living in the state, and I actually want to go to basketball games again. The last, I guess, last question: are there any other teams you want to talk or throw off till next week, Patrick?
I kind
There's
of would
more
like to
stuff.
talk lots of them, so let's just do it again next week.
Oh, sounds
I mean,
good.
I think,
'Cause, yeah.
we're all amateur economists here, so we have to talk about Cleveland because there's all this money flowing around there.
Geez, I can't. I mean, they're gonna be like 150 million or something. It's absurd.
So, I mean, I've seen lots. I don't think it's absurd to think that after luxury tax, they're going to be paying 300 million in player salaries, which is kind of insane.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I actually want to look at
It
that
really
because
depends on. I mean, it's kind of insane, and in a lot of ways, you have to be thinking. Well, there's a lot of ways that LeBron James is essentially holding that franchise hostage.
it's kind of nice if you look in regards to what happened with Dan Gilbert.
Oh yeah,
It's
no,
kind
I'm
of-
not.
it's
I'm not.
kind of
I'm not
it's
saying
kind
it's
of him
bad.
going.
I'm glad, but
It's kind of him going, oh yeah, you were mean to me a few years ago. Well, guess what? It's going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars to keep me around to even have a hope at a title. All right, this next year, yeah, they're already at 77 million if you just look at all their deals, and they don't even have LeBron or Tristan Thompson locked up.
yeah, and that's another probably 50 million.
Jeez, yeah. Well, yeah. So what'll hopefully happen by next week is we'll at least get some image of what Thompson and LeBron are going to resign for, and Cavs can be at the top of the list. With that said, I mean we've gone over an hour at this point for this week, and we talked 7-8 teams, so
Yeah.
I'm content. I'll leave the grades and the thing. I actually committed to some grades for once, and I'll leave the Chipotle story till later in the year and see if I'm I was debating letting people know I had a Chipotle story. I tried to get dinner right before the show. I was debating actually turning it into a debate for the show, but obviously free agency took precedence. So if I'm still angry in 2 weeks, we'll talk that some
You
more.
sounded pretty angry. You might still be angry in a couple weeks.
I might, yeah, we'll see. It was someone made me wait on getting Chipotle. That is an egregious sin, and we'll
That's
talk
pretty
about
egregious.
why.
And that from, I'm sorry, but that feels like, okay, at the risk of saying something racist, it feels like an endorsement for a Latino guy to be like a big fan of Chipotle. Or is it just because you have no other options in the middle of
I'm in
butt
Wisconsin,
fuck
and I
Milwaukee?
am a terrible representation. I feel bad saying this. So my name is Andres Alvarez. You'll notice I didn't roll the R on my first name, which should give you some indication about how much I am up on my heritage. I am not a good representation of Latino culture or Latino food. It took me years before I even started eating spicy stuff. So all I can say
Okay.
is Chipotle is really good. Don't take extra endorsement there.
Okay.
I'm okay moving into shout outs. I'm not really prepared here, actually, occurred to me. There were so many people talking this week. What I'll actually say is kind of sad is I insulted Kobe Bryant saying that I would take any year of Chris Paul's career. A little hyperbole there, but not much. I would take any season of Chris Paul's career over any season of Kobe's. And the end result was Kobe fans have been flooding my timeline for the last week. So I usually pick off some good comments people have given to me over the week for my shout outs. You've kind of been drowned out this last week, so apologies for that. The shout out I'll give that's kind of an easy one is Jonathan Weiler, who may be coming on the show in the next week or two, did a great post on the U.S. women's soccer team and their victory. So we definitely got to give him a good shout out for that article. Loved the post. Easy, a rote shout out to give, but yeah, Jonathan Weiler, if you're not checking out the ESPN Watch, you should be. And I forgot to ask before the show, Patrick or Brian, if either of you had shout outs.
I would like to give a shout out to Dylan Matthews of Vox.com for a really interesting article called 3 Reasons the American Revolution Was a Giant Mistake, which I thought was pretty cool article, especially on 4th of July weekend. And it's basically the 3 main reasons are if we'd stayed in the British colony as a British colony, slavery probably would have been abolished sooner. The Native Americans probably would have been would have suffered under a lot less abuse. And finally, our system of government would be so much better because parliaments are so much better than Congresses. And I thought it was a really interesting read. Check it out on Vox.com. I think
I'm really
at the
excited
risk
about
of throwing
this
too
one,
much politics in there, I thought it was a really good read.
You haven't been listening the last couple of weeks, have you, Patrick? Anyway,
I have not been listening because I've had it's been kind of crazy at work and I've been having all kinds of technical problems and then I'm sorry I haven't been listening to my own podcast.
I take the sometimes it's nice where I'm like oh man, that was a painful segment, just maybe no one will comment on it. Any shout outs out of you, Brian?
No, not really. Just Joe Johnson for still being paid the max. Like, that's pretty good for him. Well done, Joe.
And I hear he might get, I forget, some team with they were saying the Cavs might try and trade for him. I hope that happens. That'd be hilarious.
Yep, that was just dovetailing on that comment.
All right. So with that said, that's been our show. This is the Boxscore Geeks show. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher under that. If you happen to find this show not through our site, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We are live every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. That's actually a video show, so Brian includes lots of clips, shows graphics, etc. If you miss the live show, you can catch back episodes on Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We have a playlist for all the Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Co-host is Patrick Minton, aka NBA Geek. And our producer is Brian Foster, aka Boxscore Brian. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week.